I'd like to call this meeting of the New Hanover County Board of Education to order. Let's please stand for our invocation, remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and posting of colors. We'll have our invocation. Lord, we thank you for this day. We appreciate the opportunity to gather here tonight. We're thankful for those that serve here and around the world that make this possible. We ask for your guidance and wisdom in all that takes place here tonight. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Probably just the agenda, the petition. The other one I think has 3 or 4, the non-agenda.
I was just curious if they actually signed it.
Oh.
Oh, volunteers.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated, and thank you. And Mrs. Black, do you have a microphone? It's, oh, here we go. If you could pass that around and have the members please state their name, the grade they're in, please. We know they're from Murray Middle School.
Leslie, 8th grade.
Lily, 8th grade.
Joan, 7th grade. Trevor, 7th grade.
Robert, 7th grade.
Gage, 7th grade.
Hi, I'm Nora, 8th grade.
Lauren, 8th grade.
Haley, 7th grade. Garrett, 7th grade.
Grace, 8th grade.
Emma, 7th grade. Peyton, 8th grade.
Kennedy, 8th grade.
Morgan, 8th grade.
Abby, 7th grade.
Jacob, 7th grade.
Courtney, 8th grade.
Autumn, 8th grade.
Amanda, 7th grade.
Madison, 8th grade.
Brianna, 8th grade. Charlotte, 7th grade.
George, 8th grade.
Maddie, 7th grade.
Lauren, 7th grade.
Hannah, 7th grade.
Did we get everyone? Well, I know you want to give a round of applause. And I also want to add how much we enjoyed your music while we were having our policy committee meeting. Wanted to keep the door open. That was very impressive. And Mr. McCarty, I see you standing there. The principal of Murray is here. Thank you for being here. And the instructor is Laura Black. Did I get that right? Well, thank you again for being here. And if we could have our ROTC cadets, if they left, if they would please come back forward and take the microphone and introduce yourselves and what grade level and your rank. Because they're here representing New Hanover High School. I don't know if I see Mr. Finn, but go ahead, guys. And
Rakeem Dingle, 9th grade.
Matthew Carpolo, 9th grade.
Raheem Dingle, 9th grade.
Ryan Boyette, 9th grade. Sergeant. Cadet Sergeant.
Private first class. Private first class.
Private.
thank you very much. And they're from New Hanover High School. The Colonel, let's see, is it Hafer? Did I get that right?
No, I'm Master Sergeant Denigine. Hello, everybody. Master Sergeant Denigine, retired at New Hanover High School.
All righty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Ms. Black, could they, what are you suggesting, Dr. Hickey? Could they play something? How much trouble would it be for them to play another? Yeah, that'd be great. Very good suggestion.
All right, so while you're setting up, we can call the roll.
Yeah, while they're doing that, Ms. Black, we'll go ahead and call it. Ms. Adams, if you would call the roll, please.
Donald S. Hayes.
Here.
Jeanette S. Nichols.
Here.
Janice A. Kavanaugh.
Here.
Tammy J. Coble.
Here.
Lisa Eastep.
Here.
Derek G. Hickey.
Here.
Edward V. Higgins.
Here.
Thank you. While they're getting set up again, we will go ahead and for item 2, approval of the agenda. Any changes or deletions?
I have three additions, please. Under information, we had our first budget development committee. Mr. Higgins, do you want to report out from that?
I will.
All right. That'll be item E under information. Then under new business, item K, fee schedule committee report and recommendation. Dr. Hickey?
Okay.
All right. And then right after that would be policy. This will be JKL. It'll be policy 7413, report cards. I will ask for a reading of that policy and waiving a first reading. That's the only changes that I have.
Ms. Reyes, I have a question. Do we have any information on test scores from last year that are available to present tonight?
They were not, state has embargoed those until Thursday.
Till Thursday?
Anything else on the agenda? Motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It is approved. And Murray Middle School will perform once more. Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda, approval of the minutes. Item A of the regular meeting, September the 3rd, 2013. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Item B, regular meeting minutes, October the 1st, 2013.
Move for approval. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Item C, our joint meeting, October the 16th, 2013.
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's approved. Item 4, recognition of achievement.
Good evening, and I know y'all are probably real disappointed tonight not to see Belita up here. She's at a conference and asked me to stand up in her place. This is a kind of an aside. The wonderful orchestra that you just heard just a moment ago, the director, one of my former students at Laney High School, just thought I'd throw that in. Because the first recognition is for a Laney teacher. Imagine that. Our first recognition of the evening goes to Sharon Cicero, a science teacher at Laney High School. Ms. Cicero was nominated by her principal, Mr. O'Brien, for the Air Force Teacher of the Year for her longtime dedication to students and her successful lead of the Science Olympiad team. She was first named Teacher of the Year by the Cape Fear Air Force Association, and then she went on to win at the state level, earning the title of 2013 North Carolina Air Force Association State Teacher of the Year. Ms. Cicero was unable to attend and be here this evening to accept this award, but then Mr. O'Brien's here, and I asked him to come forward. And Mr. Hayes, this was Air Force. Air Force. Air Force. Yes. Yeah. The next award goes to Barbara Ussery, who is a 5th grade teacher at Castle Hayne Elementary School. Ms. Ussery was first nominated by her principal, Ms. Margaret Dickens, as Castle Haynes Elementary's most outstanding math teacher. She then went on to be selected from among the other district nominees and received a 2013 Outstanding Elementary Math Teacher Award from the North Carolina Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Ms. Ussery received a 1-year membership in the North Carolina Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and she was recognized at their annual meeting in Greensboro this past October. I would like to take a moment to recognize Ms. Margaret Dickens, principal at Castle Hayne, as well as Ms. Ussery's family. Please stand where you are. And Ms. Ussery. Yes, please stand. Ms. Ussery, please come and receive your award. That concludes our recognition.
Just wondering, is there a North Carolina Naval Air Association? Might have to check into that, Dr. Markle.
I think they're a little busier in the Air Force.
You always know the Air Force is more into education.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 is our call to the audience. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. However, time does not permit dialogue between the board and the community. While the board welcomes residents to share their views, the chairman retains the right to limit discussions on a particular topic when such comments become slanderous or personal in nature. We've had one for our agenda call to the audience. Is it Brian Lucas McLawhorn?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
How's everybody doing tonight?
I hope you're doing well.
I am, thank you for asking. I wrote a little poem.
Speaking to the mic, because they won't pick you up on the TV.
Okay, I'll just speak to everybody.
No, you need to speak into the mic, or they won't pick you up with the TV.
Okay.
It's being,
We're
How's
live.
my hair look?
it's a live broadcast.
All right. I like holding mics. Has my time started yet?
Yes, it has.
I gotta speak fast. All right. Teachers are clad in red across the Old North State. Red is the color we wear to reflect our passion to educate. Red is the color we wear to show our anger with those that legislate. Red is the color we wear to represent our salaries, which yet again have failed to inflate. Red is the color we wear because we bleed for our peers who had to vacate. Most importantly, red is our color for the students we see daily trying to motivate. Red is passion. I love my job. I didn't always, though. I was on the verge of quitting after my second year. I was inexperienced, intimidated, and on the brink of tears. But my confidence grew with the support of my peers. They pulled me from those depths to reach new heights. Don't put a lamp on the floor. A table is where you put the light, so it can illuminate more. Greatness is shared, not packed up and stored. Which brings me back to the color red that represents our anger. It's directed at those who write the laws, yet have no idea what goes on in our halls. Only rewarding the top 25% will lead us to separate, a divisive plan that intends to isolate the best from those that need a helping hand, just as I did when I first began. Love thy neighbor is our Father's command. Who wants to do that if it keeps you from a cool grand? That brings me to point 3. Red equals negative financially. Everything costs more. That's the nature of inflation. I guess our salary doesn't matter in the field of education. It's still frozen. Can someone tell us how to get a promotion? Do we need outside experience or a title change to become golden? It becomes elusive. That Benjamin. Maybe we should move like the Mexican. Red, numero cuatro. We wear rojo. This goes out to all my hermanos that left the game for many reasons. Teachers hurt, especially around the Christmas season. Feliz Navidad. Yeah, only if you teach across the river. Brunswick County beckons. Come hither. $1,000 bonus proves they have local support. With free dental, soon teachers will be our #1 export. Board members and commissioners, I hope you all are good listeners, because our fleet grows weary. We need a boost, clearly. Have you considered this county's businesses? We can't be blind. We're all eyewitnesses. What entrepreneur would bring their company to a spot where teachers starve hungrily? Don't get me wrong, we're not to that point yet, but the writing's on the wall and I begin to fret. We used to be the beacon of the Southeast, but our light grows dim, to say the least. It's not all bad news though. The last red embodies the will to grow, like a flame that starts small and ignites like a fireball. We take kids that trickle in and leave like a waterfall. The ability to motivate is a God-given talent, and no legislation will ever unsettle the balance. A skilled teacher demonstrates as they juggle their students' needs with those that call the shots. Please keep your eye on the rock. Not us teachers or scandals, but the kids instead. They deserve the best, so we stand as one in red.
Mr. Vaughn, you're okay, thank you. Item 6 is administrative personnel.
Nothing for item 6.
Item 7 under information. Item A, curricular and co-curricular activities. Appendix A, Dr. Holliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We reviewed much of this in policy today. We were directed last meeting to come back with a way that if parents chose services outside of the district, such as the Hill School, as was mentioned, to come back with a way that this could be done. We spent some time after the last meeting with our attorney, Mr. Bullard, also with the attorney from Darrington Smith, who's worked with us on several cases, and also reviewed some other systems as to what they were doing. And I provided some information to you prior to this meeting to let you know that essentially there are no other systems that have agreements or board policy, but there are some places that have some administrative procedures. And we adopted, well, actually, we didn't adopt, we actually took their administrative procedures and worked it into what we could do. But we also believed that we needed to change policy, and that would be policy 8500, which is participation in curricular and co-curricular activities. And that policy was put in place basically to make sure that students who were fully enrolled before they could participate in any of our curricular or co-curricular activities, which was in a sense congruent with state board policy and also with the North Carolina High School Athletic Association rules and regulations. That was passed several years ago. However, to put into place a system that would work in allowing parents to do something like you would ask us to have them to do, we felt like we needed to change this policy. And the policy change, and I'll just read this, Mr. Chair, if I may. The first, if we could get that on the screen, Dawn, I think that's the procedure if we get to the policy. The policy, in the first paragraph, the change says this policy shall apply to all students participating in curricular subject areas included but not limited to math, English language arts, science and social studies, music, art and physical education and media center services, and co-curricular activities including but not limited to athletics, cheerleading, marching band, and student government. The reason that math, ELA, science and social studies wasn't included in the original policy was simply because that wording was used in the state board policy. However, we felt in the interest of clarity that we would insert that to make sure that we were exactly congruent with state board policy, because state board policy doesn't mention music, art, physical education, etc. So we wanted to make sure that we were congruent with that policy as also with our own policy. However, the meat of this policy change comes in the second paragraph, and we'll pick up in red where it says exceptions to the requirement of being a full-time student in order to participate in a co-curricular activity may be made by the Student Support Services Department as long as the student is counted in the New Hanover County Schools average daily membership as defined in the School Attendance and Student Accounting Manual published by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, meaning that currently the students must attend at least one half of the instructional day in New Hanover County Schools. Which essentially what that means, Mr. Chair, members of the board, as explained during Policy Committee, is that New Hanover County would not be able to receive funding for that student if we did not do that. So this would allow the New Hanover County Schools to receive funding for that student. Second part of this policy change would be for the purposes of essentially our high school students who would, if they were to do something like this, course credit starts to be awarded at the high school level, not at the kindergarten through 8th grade level. You take subjects and you receive grades, but you don't receive course credit until you get in high school. For the parents listening to that, that's where you start counting the units for graduation. So that's essentially what I'm referring to in the second portion of the policy, which is no course credit will be given for classes taken outside the New Hanover County Schools during the instructional day, except for those courses taken through the North Carolina Virtual Public School or credit recovery courses, pardon me, that meet the requirements of the applicable regulations. Parents and students are advised that taking courses outside the New Hanover County Schools may affect the eligibility of students for athletics pursuant to the rules of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. And also embedded in that would indicate that because of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association rules, which are congruent with the National Collegiate Athletic Association rules, the NCAA rules, that students oftentimes, if they take subjects outside of their traditional high school, they don't pass clearance in the NCAA clearinghouse, which certifies students for eligibility at the collegiate level, which is whether it's Division I all the way down to Division III. So if a child goes and a student takes a course outside of our high school in some other area, oftentimes the NCAA clearinghouse looks at that with not favorable eyes, and we've seen a lot of that in other school districts around the country, when big-time athletes you always see it with a big-time athlete. We have a lot of our athletes go on to the next level, but many of our athletes go on to the next level at the Division II and the Division III level, and you don't hear a lot about them. But we're very fortunate that we get a lot of our folks that get to go to that next level, and we want to make sure that that was included and the explanation was included to parents in that. So this would require a policy change, even though we did not find school districts around the state who were engaged in activity like this had a policy to implement it. We felt like it was most important after talking with our attorneys that we have such a policy. And working through this policy, Mr. Bullard and myself and Ms. Askew, the Director of Special Education, also with the attorney from Tharrington Smith, who we've also worked with on certain cases, assisted us in developing this policy. And also the, Mr. Chair and members of the board, the procedure, which is the application that the parents would go through, which is included, again, pardon me, as a part of this process, the administrative procedure would be that the parent would apply to Student Support Services, and that application would be given due consideration and approved or not approved based on the set of requirements that are listed in the application. And one of the things that came out of policy today is that we would indicate in our policy what the appeal procedure would be, which means you would get to directly talk to the superintendent or the designee if your application were turned down. And then under the general statute, which is 115C-45, we would place that in policy, which allows a parent to petition the Board of Education for a hearing. It doesn't automatically grant a hearing, but the board can choose to do so under State Law 115C-45. So we believe that this would meet our charge from you as a board to come up with a way that if parents chose to seek educational services outside of the school district, that this would be a way for them to do it. We feel very confident that this would pass legal muster, since we had two of the brightest legal minds in the state of North Carolina helping us out on that. There was another lawyer other than Wayne. No, I'm kidding. We feel like that this would pass a legal challenge, and it would get you to where you want to be as a board. So we would simply, and Madam Vice Chair, who's the chair of the policy committee, we presented this policy tonight, and we would hope that, you know, it would, I believe it's coming for first reading. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Coming for first reading at the next meeting, and could be policy by the first of the year. So we think this is very workable, and we certainly support it, and have brought it to you for your consideration.
Any board members have any questions for Dr. Holliday?
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And it'll be on the next December meeting?
Yes, for first reading.
Okay. All right, item B, impact of Affordable Care Act, implications for the school system, Appendix B. Dr. Wilmers.
To implement the Affordable Care Act. I've asked Dr. Hahn to do a presentation. One of the main areas that this is going to impact us is with substitute teachers, and she oversees the development in the program, so I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Hahn.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of just a portion of the Affordable Care Act, and it's the part that really will have some implications for our school system, and some steps that we need to be taking now. The employer mandate has said that school systems, actually anybody, with 50 or more employees will be required to provide insurance to all full-time employees, or we will be subject to a penalty. Full-time as defined by the Affordable Care Act is 30 or more hours a week. So what the employers must do is to offer coverage to 95% of our full-time employees or pay a penalty. The penalty is $2,000 times the number of employees minus 30. This formula was presented to personnel administrators at a statewide conference, and it was by Tharrington and Smith attorneys that presented this. And when the question was asked, where did the formula come from, why minus 30, they had no idea. But if this penalty was employed, it would be extremely expensive for our school system. And what they mean by covering 95%, you would think that we would offer benefits to all 100% of our full-time employees. But one of the big pieces would be our substitutes. Currently, we don't have a way of measuring how much they work, so we don't know how many of them may qualify for full-time, and that is why we're concerned about this and bringing it before the board now to kind of give a heads up as to what we need to do to avoid penalties. So each employer is responsible for developing a plan that will measure time worked in order to identify who qualifies as this full-time equivalent employee. Again, it's 30 hours a week, or there is an alternate measurement you can use, which is 130 hours per month. Included with that is a look-back measurement. You may know that the bill was supposed to be enacted this January. That has been pushed off. It is effective for individuals this January. For the employer, it goes into effect next January. But the look-back measure says we need to look back, and we can pick a time, 6 to 12 months. And if somebody falls in that range and they qualified, we have to pay them benefits going forward. So there are many school districts that have already started, and the subs are the biggest pool for school districts, putting some measures in place now, because this could be the look-back period. Right now, we don't have a system that can track and cap substitute hours, and our system now is Smart Find Express, and what we're doing is looking at a way to get that in place. We have over 400 substitutes. At times we've been as high as 600. Included in that number are long-term subs. A long-term sub is a substitute teacher we employ that works anywhere from 4 straight weeks. Sometimes it can be 6, 7 months, which under this would qualify as full-time employment. Our substitutes, whether long-term or regular, do not qualify for benefits. Under state law, at this point in time, we do not need to offer them, and we don't. It would be very cost prohibitive. So again, we need to look at a way to monitor this. We are going to be upgrading our Smart Find Express substitute system, hopefully this month, with an upgrade. What it will allow us to do is to set the maximum work hours for a substitute. We have to stay at 29 or 129 a month. It depends if we want to do week or month. And if we cap that, that will be our way of measuring their time worked period. We would prefer, and having been a former principal, I would rather cap it by the month. If you cap it by the week, and let's say you have a classroom teacher who's out with the flu, they're out 5 days, you would not be able to have one sub cover that period. They would go over the 30 hours. If we cap it by the month, they could do a full week of work. And what we want is what's less disruptive to students, you know, continuing with the same type sub as long as possible. We will still have an issue with tracking long-term subs. And we're working on that. That might take a little bit more. The other big thing is that all subs have to be entered into the system for tracking purposes. Smart Find Express, teachers can not use the system. Let's say they have a medical procedure planned. They may have a regular sub they use that works well with their students, and they call the sub and they tell them, I'm going to need you for this period of time, please book it on your calendar, and it's set. But they're not in our system. And with this new legal requirement, they're going to have to be. So part of HR's job, we are communicating with the board. I will be bringing it out to principals, administrators. We will get the word to teachers and also to the substitutes themselves. In terms of monitoring the hours, we do have another pool of part-time workers. We have tutors, part-time, a few custodians, bus drivers, probably a larger group of part-time child nutrition workers. The difference between that group and the substitute groups is that they are paid hourly. The state, we had a big meeting between HR and finance, and we looked at the possibility of having our substitutes use our timekeeper system and clock in and out, which they don't do now. We thought that could maybe work as a monitor system. We cannot, the state, and I didn't know this, but this was from Mary Hazel Small, the state does not allow us to pay substitutes at an hourly rate. We have two choices. You can pay them for a half day or you pay them for a full day. So the timekeeper system will not work, which is why we're going to upgrade our own system and be able to do that same type of tracking. But this group here, although we'll have to monitor, we have control over. We have a monitoring system in place, which is timekeeper, which there's, part-time, their supervisors should be monitoring their hours on a weekly basis to keep them under the maximum. Also in HR, when we hire, if we're hiring a tutor or a part-time person, we always check with the principal or the hiring agent, the supervisor, and ask, if you put them over 30, you realize you will have to pay benefits. So you need to include that. If you don't have that type of money, perhaps it's a Title I program, then we need to keep their hours under 29. So they are hired on with a fixed amount of hours, so we can control that. So at this point in time, the substitutes are our biggest issue. As I said, we'll have to be communicating all of this information to our administrators. We do have access through our system to communicate with all of our substitutes, and we will also be working with the classroom teachers. And as I said, this bill goes into effect January 1, 2015, but the look-back measure requires us to look back 6 months to 12 months, and anyone who has worked 3 months of either over 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month qualifies, and we would have to pay them benefits going forward, which we do not have the money for. So, are there any questions? Yes.
I have a couple of questions, just for clarification. A sub, how many hours a day does a sub normally?
Well, good question. And I just sent another clarification out to principals. Teachers actually go into the system and they put in the hours that they're going to be out. So let's say they had something that wasn't a full day, but more than a partial day. So they said, I'm going to be out from 7:30 to 12:30, maybe some little medical procedure, not get back into the building. When they put in those hours, that constitutes a full day for a substitute. So what we're telling principals that they need to check, because once you go over, and this is state regulations, 3 hours and 45 minutes for a teacher, that constitutes a full day. So then you need to keep them there the full day and utilize, even if the classroom teacher comes back, take advantage of that.
Well, what I'm trying to understand, though, is this. 129 hours a month is what I think you said we would probably do.
Yes.
What I'm trying to understand, and I understand what you just said, but what I'm trying to understand is if a sub is present for a day, how many hours would we be charged for that makes up a sub's day? Is it 8 hours or is it
7.5?
7.5? Okay.
For a teacher day.
Okay. Now, the other question I have, and you kind of answered it, but if somebody, if we slip up, if we do cut back on hours or something, and we slip up, somebody goes over, I think you said 3 consecutive months, then they're entitled to, then we have to pick them up. Does that mean we have to pick them up forever and ever, or?
For a year, I believe.
Okay, so it kind of comes up for renewal, like when the insurance comes up for renewal, their status would come up for renewal.
Right, we will have to set this look-back measure. It's a report that will have to be done, whatever the basis is, every 6 months or every 12 months. And as a part of to avoid slip-ups, the benefit of upgrading the Smart Find Express system is that when we put in a cap for the substitutes, and let's say it's 129 hours for a regular sub, when they hit that, the subsystem caps them and blocks all calls. So they will not get, which is why we can't let teachers call them at home and go around the system. If we use the system correctly, that should not happen, because it will stop all calls until the month ends, and then it reactivates them.
So I have a couple of questions as well. First, is this a recommendation, or does the board have to perform any action to make this happen?
No.
It's just what we intend to do as a district?
Right, it's what we're required to do.
Well, no, we could pay people benefits.
We could.
Yeah. So to be
But Mary
clear,
Hazel didn't feel we had the
money for that.
finances
Yeah.
to.
So
Yeah,
to be
it's a 2015 issue in terms of effective date. So, I mean, as we hit the budget process for that year, if that was the intent, we'd have to set aside.
So to be clear, that there's going to be people who we're limiting their hours as a result of the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
That is correct.
Starting now.
I don't have data because the system now does not measure time worked. That's not built into the it's a simple system we have. That particular function's not there. So I have no idea if
many
it will
people?
impact our system. You know, are there subs that on a regular basis do more than 120 hours a month? I don't know that. And there's no way for me to get that from our current system.
And do you have an estimate on what it's going to cost our district for the upgrade and for increased manpower to deal with this?
There won't be, I mean, we have a substitute manager person
So just one person's going to do it?
that handles our whole system and does it very effectively, so.
And what does the upgrade cost?
The upgrade is about $2,500. And it will give us several other functions besides the capping and, you know, blocking the calls, and it'll allow us to do the reporting that actually I think becomes a part of the IRS requirement. Certain reporting, it's a lot of data that has to be turned in.
But you're saying we're going to institute all of that now because of the look back, correct?
As soon as feasible.
Okay.
You know, we haven't got the upgrade yet.
Right, but as
we
soon
have
as
to-
that is in place.
Yes, get it
okay.
in place. I mean, our goal, what I'd like the timeline to be, I would like us to be able to start doing this effective January 1.
Okay.
I also have to communicate, you know, I will be bringing it up with principals at the principal meeting Thursday. And then we need to get the word out to teachers, also the frontline people, so that when the office people check, they can make sure that the person is in the system, or help the teacher if they're not in the system. That's going to be really critical.
Okay.
And then we will be alerting the subs. It could have an impact, I don't know, in terms of that we may need to hire more substitutes.
I have one other question.
I have a question.
Oh,
to
okay,
everyone.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
If a substitute is a retired person that's already received health benefits, then can they go over the 30 hours?
That was brought up at our meeting, and they said at this point in time, it is not clear because in the past, at one point in time, and it's before I was in HR, but we were charged for the health benefits of retirees. If they came back, we were charged part of that amount. So at this point, until that's clarified, we would not let them go over either. The point is going to be long-term substitutes will go over. We've got to have them when there's a situation involving, let's just say maternity, and someone is out for a couple months. What we're really going to look at closely, and I've talked to just a few principals, how we can manage that. And if we determine we want our best people to be the long-term subs, and if we get someone in that position, then what we need to do on our part, HR's part, is to make sure they stay employed because they will qualify for benefits. So if they're going to get the benefits, then we'll make sure they get the long-term jobs that come open.
And you said get verification. Who's going to make all these decisions that are so up in the air? Where are you going to get the...
On the Affordable Care Act?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it does come out through, I mean, we got some went to our benefits department. They are supposed to keep us informed so we know and can meet the letter of the law. Right now, the state health plan is not in line with the Affordable Care Act, so we are waiting to see what happens with that, maybe in the spring.
So we can still have deadlines even though we can't have answers.
Definitely. That's why we want to be proactive. We don't want a penalty. We don't want to fall into a situation where we have incurred, you know, an amount of money that we really don't have set aside for this.
Any other questions?
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hahn.
Thank you.
Dr. Welmers, anything else that?
Up next. And when Dr. Hahn says when she means in the system, she is talking about in our substitute system. The substitutes are, of course, in our system and in our payroll systems, but it's our substitute system that is an automated system that currently cannot keep track of that we're going to update.
You're up for item C?
Yep.
Okay, item C on the agenda, teacher tenure, appendix C. Dr. Welmers.
Thank you, and as Mrs. Nichols just pointed out, we have a tremendous grasp of all the questions concerning this item, but we don't have a lot of the answers yet. And many of us have been to different types of legal meetings of attorneys presenting, other HR folks presenting, trying to determine where we're going to go with this. So what I want to do tonight is to show you and give you some answers as to what's in the law, what the requirements are, and some ideas that we have to try to meet this law. But we're not saying tonight we don't want any action. We're not asking for action. We want to keep you abreast of what's going on because this is changing. And literally this changed for me Friday from an HR meeting that Dr. Hahn and I attended in Jacksonville, where a lot of this information is being sort of scrutinized. And I know that Mr. Bullard and Dr. Markley have both been to meetings, and we're not getting the same answers across the board. We want to have this in place at the latest by January. We want our teachers and our staff members to know where we are on this, but it is, we're building this plane as we fly it, just about literally. We know what part of the intent, or we think we know what the intent of the General Assembly was in parts of this, but I don't know that they saw completely the unintended consequence of some of the other parts. That's what we're trying to deal with. So by the end of the 2013-2014 school year, which would be the end of this year, what the law requires is the superintendent shall select 25% of teachers, and I have that in quotes for a reason, that meet specific criteria to recommend to you, the Board of Education, for approval. The selected teachers should represent this is theoretically, they should represent the top performing teachers in the state. The law does not, I mean in the county, the law doesn't say that, but theoretically in what we're hearing from the way this was intended, that was the intent. All 4-year contract offers must be made and accepted no later than June 30th, 2014, and will run from July 1, 2014 through June 30th, 2018. Now keep in mind that this parallels the Teacher Tenure Act, which changes, which at 2018 removes tenure from all teachers. This is another track that will lead to a contract to that point, but right now we're going to worry about 2013, 2014 because 2018 is a long way off. Okay. We're going to have an eligible list of 25% of selected teachers. You'll review that selected teacher recommended by the superintendent, and you can either accept the list that the superintendent gives you, or you can recommend an alternative teacher to add to that list. The total number of teachers approved by the board and offered 4-year contracts must equal 25% of the eligible teachers, what we're calling teachers, employed by the school system for the past 3 years. Now the 3 years is important because that goes 3 years back to 2010. So these folks must have been employed by the school system in 2010 to get 3 years to come to the beginning of this year.
And when the legislature wrote the rule, they originally, their intent supposedly was classroom teachers, but a request was made to the Attorney General to look at the statute and define teachers. And they've actually identified that as a larger pool than just those who are in the classroom. So basically under the Attorney General's ruling, anybody who's evaluated on a teacher contract qualifies for that large pool to be part of that 25%.
Any teacher who refuses the offer will retain tenure into 2018.
refuses to be considered part of the 25% or refuses the contract, or is that considered both?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
I'm kind of confused by when you say they're refusing the contract. Are they still considered the top 25%?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
they
so
are.
so they retain a spot, but they don't have the contract to
That's
show
right.
for it.
It's actually a choice the teacher can make.
Okay.
If they accept this contract, the deal is then you give up tenure.
Right.
So basically, that's this 25% is making the decision. Do I keep my tenure until 2018 when it's legally slated to go away, or do I accept this bonus and give up tenure in exchange for a contract, for an extended contract?
Where did they get 25%? Anyone know? Any idea?
No.
Just thought I'd ask.
Is that how much money they thought they could allow?
Well, there's a lot of theories about that, about the money that was saved going into the future on where they made cuts in master's degree and other higher level degrees, that money would then turn around and fund this. But I understand I think as they got deeper into the process, that kind of dissolved.
And if you look at the actual state budget, there's only funding right now for 1 year, because it's a biennium budget. It's in the budget for next year. It's not guaranteed to be in the budget going forward after that. So there's a question about if the state doesn't include continuing funding for this, is the local district obligated to pick up those costs?
This basically summarizes what Dr. Markley was saying. The Attorney General weighed in on what teachers were, and this is the definition of teachers, and it is, of course, classroom teachers, special ed teachers, but it includes all instructional support personnel, guidance counselors, social workers, school psychologists, media, instructional coaches, career tech people. One of the reasons this is important is they're evaluated in a different way than teachers are. So teachers in the classroom. So making a comparison between the two is difficult because the evaluation process is different. The law also says that the school system will define the teachers from this pool who are eligible to be included in the 25% decision. In other words, we can look at 25% of all the people that we just said are eligible, and we can reduce that into a group as we desire. Yes, sir.
It sounds like this is something, if it's 25% and you get a 4-year contract, is this something we only will do once every 4 years?
No, this is one time only.
This is one time only?
Yes, this is not a 25% every year or
No,
every
I know
4
it wouldn't be
years.
25% every year, otherwise you'd have everybody over the course of the.
Part of the intent here is the state does away with tenure, is to move some folks off of that. So they want to take those folks, that 25%, and sort of offer them an incentive to give up that tenure in exchange for the bonus money.
But then after the first year, the second year, contracts that can be offered to teachers the second year are
1 year.
So this group, this 25% will get a 4-year contract.
What happens when the 4 years are up?
They don't have tenure.
I know they don't have tenure, but I mean.
No one does.
Well, I understand that. I understand that, but I'm saying.
After that, then contracts can be 1, 2, or 4 years.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get, that's what I was trying to find out. So in the first 4 years, you'll have the people who get a 4-year contract.
Right.
Then the other 75% all can get a 1-year contract?
Well, all teachers who are currently tenured remain tenured.
Right, okay.
All teachers who are in the gap right now, who would have retained tenure at the end of this school year, will be on 1-year contracts for 4 years until 2018. Where
Okay.
then we will turn to a 1, 2, or 4-year contract cycle.
So theoretically, as you understand it right now, when 2018 comes around, you could give 85% of our teachers 4-year contracts?
Well, I think that the intent of the law is when we get to 2018, we will have as the state says, a robust evaluation system, which will define where you are in the 1, 2, or 4-year contract.
I understand that. I mean, I understand their expectations and beliefs, but what I'm asking is, as a practical matter, as a reality, could the school system conceivably decide that 80% of our teachers deserve a 4-year contract and give them a 4-year, I mean, there's no mathematical limit on how many teachers can get a 4-year contract in 2018, is there?
There were discussions of quartering it, which became statistically kind of weird. And so they backed off of that. And as far as I know right now, when we get to 218, yes, we could give every one of our tenured teachers a
100%.
4-year contract.
Okay, just trying to get an understanding of that.
What we were thinking about eligible teachers, and this is where it's very up in the air.
And folks, this is a discussion at this point.
Yeah.
These are not hard and fast. The basic advice that I think John, I, and Wayne have gotten is whatever system we adopt, we have to be able to defend it at some point as being a fair system to all involved.
So all this that you're saying now is what we've made up?
Well, there are requirements in the law to go in this direction.
Okay.
But we can set these parameters. And we've actually, after meeting Friday, I found out that I've got to change a parameter. Because the first one was what we were looking at was the possibility or the proposal that the intent of this was for classroom teachers. So what we wanted to do was to narrow the Attorney General's eligible pile, so to speak, of all folks who are eligible down to classroom teachers. Because if there's benefit in this, we wanted that benefit to be there. But some of the attorney kind of rulings that are coming on this is that may not be the right thing to do. It may leave us somewhat liable. So what we're also thinking about doing is not only the classroom teachers, and we would look at each school, 25% of classroom teachers at each individual school. But we would also set up a group of support instructional folks who would be guidance, psychologists. They would be their own pool of 25%. So each school would have a pool of classroom teachers that we're defining as classroom teachers at 25%. And then we would have a pool of support personnel who meet the instructional term of teachers that we would pick 25%. So that's what we're proposing right now to kind of meet. Is that a good summary, Wayne?
Yeah, I agree. What you said is accurate, exactly.
So that's what we're proposing. So the first one, we need to add the caveat, because this happened Friday, that we would also add that pool of 25% of instructional support personnel also.
I understand that we kind of have the freedom to do this as long as we stay within the 25% parameter. But it strikes me that, first off, you may have a school which unfortunately, a school maybe that tends to have a lot of new teachers, and that 25% of those teachers won't even qualify under this 3-year rule. Now, I mean, that's one thing, but what I'm more concerned about is this whole idea that I could be a good teacher, but I'm not in the right school. So I don't make the 25% at my school because I am not at some other school, which may not be, somebody might make 25% at that school. I have a real concern about doing it as 25% per school. I understand why you want to do that, because the principal does the evaluation and all that kind of stuff, and it does help to departmentalize it. But I am concerned that there may be some teachers out there that are at schools that they are good teachers also, and they end up being on the outside looking in because they're not at a school that doesn't have as many people.
I think you're right. You're actually giving the argument for both ways. To take the evaluation process out of the equation and make the evaluation process more equitable is to do it by school, because then you're in some degree taking the principals and the evaluation process of the school out. If we did it as a system at the top 25% and just went, we put everyone, and part of it is going to depend upon how we identify, how do we award, so to speak, this 25%. Now,
one of the things we run into if you try to do it as a system is we've really worked with our principals to say honest evaluation. And we have some schools where principals have gone in and done real honest evaluations, and where if you got a maybe a proficient instead of the top scale, you may be a good teacher, but that teacher, the principal thinks you can grow. I may have had a situation where an interim principal was there, and they weren't as intense or restrictive on their evaluations. So I end up with a school where I may have some slightly inflated grades on their evaluation compared to another principal who's been a much more firmer grader. So that inter-rater reliability between schools becomes a real question. And so that's the dilemma. It's 25% of the district, or do we take it individual schools and try to alleviate some of that variation between principal evaluation?
I know we used to have at Cape Fear, the feeling was that certain programs would think all their faculty were great. And then there were other programs where there was honest evaluations. And the other question I wonder about is, what happens, you're talking about, maybe a teacher could grow. What happens if we don't have 25% of our teachers who are totally proficient?
Well,
Or what happens at the other side? You have 27.
Well, that's
Those
true,
other
too.
2% are screwed?
right. Well, that's a good
Yeah,
point. Let me
they are.
kind of get to the before we're screwed part.
Sorry.
The teachers having worked, you have to work at least 120 days, okay, to be a full year. The 3 consecutive years is a state requirement. The teachers who are deemed effective have demonstrated obtaining a proficient rating on standards 1 through 5 on the teacher evaluation instrument. That kind of gets to where you are, Ms. C-Step, is you have to be proficient. And that's state law. The teacher has to be. That's not us. Now, we
Well,
can
but-
set the bar over it.
But my struggle with the evaluation is how, in an evaluation, how often do you have to be physically observed? And if you're talking about an evaluation, say, of an EC teacher, you have to rely on the fact that the person who's doing the evaluation understands the methodology that's being used in that classroom.
Right.
So you're talking about very specific methodology, and that person really has to understand it, and that's what you're relying on to get a proficient score. And so that's problematic. So I'm basing all that, and then I gotta come up with, well, am I gonna get to that imaginary line of the 25%? This is really tough.
Yes, excellent point. You're exactly right. What this pushes back on is the evaluation process itself and the implementation of it. Now keep in mind, the issue that we're having with it is the evaluation process. The online process we use for the last 3 years has been McCrell. This year we've turned to True North Logic. Well, the data that McCrell has on our teachers has not been pushed over to the new True North Logic.
Just came this
Oh, it
afternoon.
came this afternoon? Well, there you go.
Just in
All right.
So what does that mean?
Well, that means we now have data, and I don't know the usable, it was said it was going to be in a PDF file. We don't know how it's used. But we are proposing that what we look at to determine a teacher's at 25% is last year's evaluation. Why we were proposing that was we were told for a long time that we wouldn't get the 2 years ahead of that, the 3 years to look at. It literally disappeared as the two systems moved across. And if you're a teacher this year doing True North Logic, and I know a lot of people in here are and will testify, True North Logic hadn't worked real well. Now, it's going to take it a while before it gets to a point that it is actually working. It's difficult to deal with. It's crashing. It's like any new program. And so it's very hard to depend upon this year. So we're going to look at what's manageable for either last year, and if we can use it the last 2 years. And the longer we can average out, the better able we are to wash out the evaluation effect and be more of an average for where that teacher is over time. We could even say the teacher was having a difficult time for 3 months last year because of a family crisis or something else. Well, we know it's a good teacher. We don't want to take that 3 months. So the longer we can average in, the better we can do this.
And these are summative evaluation ratings, not an individual. If you did 4 observations, it wouldn't be one observation would knock you out. You're looking at the end of year standard on those 5 areas.
How many evaluations or evaluations do you have to do? What am I trying to say?
Observations.
Observations, sorry.
You've got to do, depending upon where you are in your cycle, anywhere from 1 to 3 observations, full observations. But in
And
that
then 20
summative,
minutes?
it can
20
include a
minutes?
lot of short data. It can include stuff beyond just the formal observations. So a summative is more of a picture of that teacher's total year than just one of those individual snapshots.
Okay.
And that's part of the problem we have is during the last 3 years, we're on a 5-year evaluation cycle. So a tenured teacher is on a 2-standard observation over the last 2 years, where some other teachers who are up in their cycle for license are on a 5-standard evaluation. So we have to, when we create the statistical formula that measures this, we have to take into consideration the number of standards that teacher was evaluated on. And it may have been all short-term walkthrough evaluations so we have to compare those two together. So that's another weakness in the process, and we'll make up that statistically once we know how we can use the data. Now keep in mind that our teachers have to be at a proficient rate by our policy, or we're going into an action situation, an improvement plan. So we know that the majority of our teachers are at this minimal level. We can establish if there's more of a level as we go through, but we know they're at this minimal level right now, the majority. What we were looking at, this was once we get the eligible list, what would we measure them on? We were looking at the 2012-2013 individual teacher evaluation. That was because that's what we thought we would have this year, is that evaluation. It may be that we can go back 2 years if that data is usable, and I think it hopefully will be. We can also look at national board certification, we can look at EVOS, we can look at an advanced degree. Now, the law requires us to look at performance of the teacher on an evaluation. It is teacher performance is what the law says. What we think is, let's just say we have 25% per school, and as Ms. Eastep very well pointed out, you're supposed to have 5 teachers who are in the 25%. But when we take their evaluations and look at them, we've got 8 teachers. So now we have 3 teachers, and how are we to say why you're not in the top 5, why you're number 7 and 8 when you're the same as the top 5? You're basically tied. Well, what we were looking at was having the national board or the EVOS or the advanced degree as being a tiebreaker. But what I think we'd rather do with that, and what we're seeing legally that we saw Friday, is we would rather push down into the elements of the evaluation. The evaluations are made up of standards, and the standards are made up of elements. The elements are the things that we measure to say the teacher is effective in that element. That includes artifacts, classroom observation, anything that they have. We're saying instead of using the national board or the advanced degree, which we're kind of, really I don't know that statistically or that's going to make that big a difference. We'd rather push into the elements and use that and not use those as the tiebreaker. And so that's what we would propose. We use the evaluation process to determine who these folks are at the school or the system level. We then, if we have a tiebreaker, we look at the elements and the tie. And then once we get that number, we're going to bring that to you all for approval. And once we have approval, what are they eligible for? They're eligible for a 4-year contract, like Dr. Markley said. They would come off of tenure status and go into 4-year contract. They'd have $500 annual pay raise for each year of the contract. Now, our understanding is if the funding stands, it would be a cumulative $500 each year, which would be their total annual salary over the life of the teacher, which is significant. But that has now been questioned by the budget issue, the funding issue. So I don't know. I can't say exactly where that's going to go. That's what we were originally believing.
And depending upon which lawyer you talk to, there's a question about does that continue after the 4 years, or is that a permanent kind of pay raise? Because at the end of it, it's that last 4th year, you're basically, it's a $2,000 addition to your pay for that year, which is a significant amount. But depending upon who you talk to, does that continue on past that 4 years, or at the end of that 4 years, are you done and you go back to your original base salary?
Right. So that we don't know. That's and Dr. Mark said, kind of up in the air. You would have distinction as a top performing teacher in the county. That would be a distinctive. Any teacher who accepts a 4-year contract, relinquish career status, and becomes subject to the new teacher employment provisions. So now you're under the new contractual, even for 4 years.
And our understanding is that the NEA will challenge the new law, not on the elimination of tenure, in that anybody who comes on board from this point forward, the state says there's no tenure, but for those who have tenure, they may challenge whether you can take tenure away from somebody who already has it. They ran into this a similar point when they eliminated principal tenure. Those principals who had tenure kept it until they aged out or retired out of the system. And then anyone new coming after didn't have that protection. So there's a legal challenge about whether tenure can actually be taken away as sort of an agreement when you signed on as a teacher when you got tenure.
If the teacher that we select, you guys vote, you say, okay, this is our top 25% of our teachers, either by school or by district. We're then going to offer them this contract. They have the right to refuse it. They can say, no, I don't want this. They will remain in tenure until 2018. If they accept it, then they will have the new contract and the $500 and wherever that leads. Non-career status teachers who didn't get career status by the end of last year are going to be under one-year contracts. That's where for those folks, that would include probationary, that would include any teacher that did not obtain tenure last year. When we voted on tenure, tenure is done. They will be on one-year contracts until 2018, when we can then turn to a 1-2-4 contract. So that's what it is. We've had questions about, can a school opt out of this, and they cannot. State law is that we must provide this. An individual teacher certainly has the right to say no to the contract. Once we approve it and we make the offer, that number that we represent to you all has to be 25% of eligible people. But the 25% don't have to accept it. They can all say no and stay on tenure, and we just go from there.
John, have we gotten clarification on whether if somebody rejects, we go to the next person on the list until we get to 25%?
Yes, that is a no. If a person rejects it, we don't go down the list. We're going to have a set number of 25% teachers that we will have the names, you will vote on, and that's it. We offer those 25% teachers. If they all turn us down, then we're done.
So at a school where you're trying to identify 25%, and you do, and say 5 of those teachers say they do not want it, you can't go to the next 5?
No.
No. We have to restart the process and come back to you for you to approve into the next 5. And the state is not recommending that right now.
You will actually approve the list before we go to the teacher.
Right.
You're the first step of the process. Here's our 25%, yay or nay on this list. Then we go to the teacher and say, you're on the 25% list. Do you want this contract?
But how can we give them a contract when we don't even know what the contract is going to say, because we don't know how they're going to get the $500 or when or for how long or what that means?
Welcome to our world.
Yes, that's an excellent point. That's one of the top questions we have had, and we don't have an answer. You're exactly right. Any other questions? This could take 68 slides, which Wayne and I have from an attorney, and we try to narrow this down as much as we can. But
so one of the questions we're asking tonight is there feedback from the board in terms of indicators. We know we're going to have to use the evaluation, but if we get to that point where we've got 40% of our teachers who meet a certain evaluation criteria, does the board have certain specifics they're looking for to get that down to 25?
Well, I mean, I think everyone here is expressing frustration in the sense that we kind of know what the state legislature was trying to do. They were trying to get rid of tenure. They were trying to bring on merit pay. But they jumbled everything together with this sort of carrot and stick scenario, and it's really confusing. It would be very nice if they were going to do this, if they came up with the rubric that they intended for us to use. But of course they haven't, which, as we've had in prior discussions, opens us up to legal challenges unless we can sort of substantiate the rubric we're using. And so I would like to see, you're recommending just using the evaluations and delving down into the various categories. I think at a work session would be very nice to see your recommendation, and to, we could spend the whole night tonight discussing, which of these things we want to use, which of the things we don't want to use. But I'd like to see your recommendation sort of out in front of us and how that would work. And then part of your packet, I included a little bit of information that we can either put up or the board can look at later. And I sent an article to all of you today, sort of statistically proven things that correlate with, effectiveness data. And, you know, interestingly, and I didn't know this starting out, but national board certification actually does correlate with teacher effectiveness. So that might be something we want to look at. But, you know, I think we need to sort of sit down as a group and look at the rubric and sort of come up with.
Was that 56-page thing that you sent today?
Yeah, I read it. You didn't read it?
I got
I skimmed down till I got to the conclusion. You know.
Well, I gave you a summary slide in
Oh,
your
good. Thank
new
you.
presentation. The Reader's Digest version for Mr. Hayes. But maybe I think it's a good topic for a work session.
And we are considering a work session on the 26th, are we not?
We've got a budget session on the 26th. We can expand that into a work session.
Perhaps we.
Was that what we discussed?
No, we talked about it being a policy meeting time as well.
Oh, okay.
We can definitely expand that.
I guess child nutrition could probably make a mean turkey for the 28th if you want.
This is very, very, as you said, so many unintentional consequences and so frustrating to the teachers. This is just not fair.
No argument from me at all. No, ma'am.
Or are we thinking then about the 26th to have a work session, or is there anything else?
Would you like Ms. Adams to look at it and send you out an email about that date or an alternate date if that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the only thing that we need really to delve into and discuss if Dr. Wellman's kind of something available for us.
And by the 26th, the Lord only knows what,
Yeah, we could change by
Yeah.
tomorrow afternoon, so.
You may get one answer by then.
mhm.
We will know about the evaluation data by that time and how well we can use that. So that, we'll
We
have an
literally just
idea
got
of that.
this afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, at the law conference, they had quite a few sessions on firing an at-will employee, on tenure and everything else. And they, some of them were given by the Institute of Government, and other ones were given by Tharrington Smith. And as you know, they always do a wonderful job. You might consider bringing
How
either
about
one
you
of
give
those.
us a report on it?
I'll be glad to give you a report on it. In fact, I've got the notebook that I wanted to have a copy made for each of you, so that you would have the,
I think maybe next meeting would be a.
Tharrington Smith did our legal session that both Dr. Welmers and Dr. Holliday went to also, and we've got that information as well. So if you leave us your book, and we can see if there's any changes from those
yeah,
two.
Tharrington Smith is, they always do a bang-up job, but the gentleman from the Institute of Government was wonderful.
And I promise to read it, not just the conclusion.
Okay.
If you want me to read 56 pages, you've got to send it earlier than when I received that today.
Well,
Thank you, Mr.
let
Chairman.
me just.
Thank you, Dr. Wellers.
You were talking about the 26th. We do have a budget meeting down at the administration building.
We can do our work session there as well. I mean,
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, though, that if that be the case, it probably couldn't start till about 5, unless you wanted to do it earlier before the, and I don't know what time,
So what time is your meeting on?
3:30.
3:30?
Just-
And policies meeting that day?
Well, we had thought we might be able to work it in because we do have several things we need to address.
We have an appeal that we have got to get settled tonight, an appeal on an
well, we can push
expulsion.
policy back to the December meeting, because it's only a week further down the road.
Right, we can do that.
And then slide the appeal in, maybe either in December or at this 26th meeting.
I can't meet on the 26th. I could meet on the 25th, or y'all can carry on without me. That would
Well-
probably shorten the meeting a great deal.
Why don't we let Mrs. Adams handle this, because we
Yeah,
may not
you-
get around it.
If you've already have you just send that out and then we'll see who can make it, who cannot, and,
For some reason, I
Timeframe.
had a work session scheduled on the 19th.
We did,
That's
and I
just
think
for
it
you,
was,
Ed.
That's just the,
Is that
that's,
just, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna just show up by
you
myself?
need extra.
You need more.
Extra attention.
That's right.
Okay, well, I'm just saying that.
Yeah,
all right, we'll get the email out and try to nail down a date.
okay.
thank you.
Okay, item
Before you,
D.
before you go on, I did wanna comment, I found the, if you go back and look at what Dr. Wilmer's attached along with the teacher effectiveness, the master's degree.
Actually, that's Dr.
Yeah, I
Higgins.
attached that stuff, yeah. It was me.
That's your stuff?
Yes.
No,
Oh.
it's the summary to the
56 page.
Then, no, he's talking about the thing on the agenda.
Yeah, right there, up on the board, yeah.
You attached that?
Yeah.
Oh,
I can
and
type.
it's already on our agenda.
I can type.
Oh, I'm
Well, I mean,
impressed.
it didn't have your name by it, that's the only reason.
Oh, okay.
He didn't make a title slide. Title slide next time.
Go ahead, sorry.
Was that it, Mr. Higgins? or-
Well, no, I was just gonna say that, you know, I found it quite enlightening because I guess maybe people who are not in the field of education, for example, David McCullough and some other people who I believe have some credibility, have expressed a different belief. I know David McCullough talked about the fact that he thought if education was going to be a profession, that nobody should be teaching that didn't have a master's degree, because he thought that what ought to happen is that the undergraduate degree ought to be in a subject matter, whether it's history, math, science, English, whatever, and then what they ought to do is to get a master's in education. And that would specialize them in how to approach teaching all these various subjects, rather than have schools that have a 4-year education program and graduates, like a math teacher or a science teacher who's only been in school 4 years, so they've only had like 1 year of actual instruction in their subject matter, and then they've had teaching classes, education classes. And I found it quite interesting that the data seems to, at least on this, seems to indicate that having a master's degree does not make a person a better teacher, a more competent teacher, a more capable teacher. And I just simply was observing that that kind of flies in the face of what I have heard.
But you have to have your master's to get your national boards, right?
No.
No, you don't, no.
And it might just be, and people have been talking about the schools of education and what they're teaching in their master's programs. It may be, the data is sort of counterintuitive, as you point out. You would think that people who are getting more advanced degrees in education field should intuitively be more effective teachers. It may just be that the schools of education are, and we have a meeting this week with
Sorry to say that.
UNCW.
I was gonna.
It may be that they're not doing a great job in their master's programs at teaching the type of things that teachers need to be effective. And interestingly, why I included that 52-page paper, I hadn't counted the number of pages. 56, sorry, is that data comes from the North Carolina database. It comes, and so this is 10 years of data from North Carolina, which comes up with the last slide. It did say that national board certification was associated. Master's degrees weren't. These are the 4 sort of conclusions that paper came up with. And so, of course, more experienced teachers turned out to be better teachers. Again, that's sort of intuitive, but it turns out to be correct, that with more experience you become a better educator. And I guess the teacher test scores on the praxis exam, so if you're actually better at math, it turns out that you're better at teaching math, which again is sort of intuitive, but just because things are intuitive doesn't mean necessarily that when you look at the data it will actually be true. And we see that in all fields of endeavor. So that's why that was an interesting paper, particularly as we have to come up with a rubric, because this is what the data shows in North Carolina.
Also, to remember this Thursday night from 5 to 7, we do have that meeting at Watson School of Education. So, questions, things of this nature, we can certainly, bring up at that point. Anything else on item C? All right, because we've been asked to take a break before we do the Murrayville Elementary lease, so at this time we'll take a 5-minute break.